I don't know why they're trying to do it, because it serves no purpose. If they're that intelligent, just leave them on the ships, train them to operate your ships. It doesn't make any sense to bring them to Earth. The only thing I could see why they would want them to bring them to Earth is because of what people are calling the ascension, or what is believed to be the ascension. When that happens, they would want them to be on Earth, hoping.
What about like
maybe
Manchurian candidates? Sorry to interrupt, but that's what's coming to my mind.
No, I don't think they'd be. I don't think they'd be Manchurian candidates. They're not. They have the ability to make you do things telepathically. They can control you. They can make you wake up, get dressed, go get your car, and drive out into the road where they're waiting for you. From the people that they've already, like, let's say it's their parent, one of the people that they took cells from, created them. I've heard of that. They don't like that control at all. When they're at a job, like they try and fit in and get a job somewhere, they don't really work very well. So they have to, let's say they go to a restaurant, they have to control the person giving them the food and make it look like they got paid when they didn't, but that person ends up getting fired. And just little things like that. It's something they can't keep up. These things, the grays, there's two types of them. The work I did trying to figure out what these were, the ones I was dealing with, during Eisenhower's meeting in the desert, there was a priest who was at the location, and he was told to keep quiet, but he didn't. He went to the Vatican and told them what had happened. There were several species meeting with the president and several other individuals, and they wanted us to disarm, and they would assist us in what's about to happen, so we'd be ready for the ascension. The others, the Greys, offered weapons and technology in exchange for abducting humans. And they went with those guys. What was fascinating about them, though, was when they were abducting individuals, the military ordered them to only abduct 400 per year, and they needed the names and dates of the locations and addresses of these people. What the Greys said, these particular type of Greys, they said that they were from Earth. They said they were from the future, and they said they were horribly damaged by the radiation. Something bad had happened. They had gone underground into underground bunkers, and they thought they would survive. But what happened was females could not reproduce after 45 days underground. And then they had to use their cloning technology. That sounds pretty far-fetched, but I've seen cloning technology is very real. Anyway, these guys had it at that time, and that was the only way they could survive, by cloning themselves over and over and over. They were trapped underground during the earthquakes that took place. And this would be somewhere about what we would call the apocalypse time frame. Anyway, they finally got out of there. And when they got to the surface, they were horribly damaged by the radiation. The military jumped to the conclusion it was some sort of ICBM war with other countries here on the planet. I immediately suspected the power plants, because if we lose power or one of those gets damaged, they start releasing a tremendous amount of radiation. They have a lot of fuel rods that will burn for a long, long time. And that will cause a huge cloud of radiation that will pretty much poison anything gets anywhere near it. There's 120 on the East Coast alone. So you've got a tremendous amount of death just waiting there for people. Anyway, these guys said that their DNA was horribly damaged, that some other extraterrestrials came by, found them, and took them to their worlds. And so when these Greys, when you see them, smooth skin with the almond-shaped eyes, those are actually an outer suit that they wear. And some movies have brought this out, some documentaries. Underneath, their skin looks like the bark of a tree and smells like putrid cinnamon. And you don't want to touch it. They have so much bacteria on them. But they had kept themselves alive for a long time. There were some of them that had some human cells, and those are the ones I believe that are trying to create these birthing projects. But this particular group came back to Earth, and they said they wanted to get the DNA from their ancestors, the ones who went down into these subterranean cities that they had for themselves, their bunkers, and repair their DNA using the DNA of their great ancestors, their grandfathers, their parents. And that's not what they did. They started abducting a lot of people, way more than 400. And then they started messing with them in a way that would sort of wake them up spiritually and move them away from the path that would have taken them into the underground bunkers. That's why they weren't releasing any of the addresses or the names of these individuals. So basically what they did was they found a way to prevent their grandfathers and grandmothers from ever meeting with each other, or their parents from ever meeting with each other. That means they had to cease existing, and thereby creating a sort of self-sacrifice. I believe that's why it was permitted to be done. Anyway, that was that particular group. So they prevented them from going down underground bunkers. When the military started doing experiments in the 50s with women in colleges asking for volunteers to stay underground for long periods of time, they realized that after about 45 days, the women's reproductive system shut down. So they realized these things were telling the truth. And then they started building the underground bunkers because they figured they would need them for these whatever event was coming up into the future. So that was my extent to my knowledge of the Greys. Also, most of the Greys, the little ones we see that walk in 4 or 5 at a time, those in the Bible, in Scripture, are called the Raphium, dead things, because they're not alive. They're more machine. They're biomechanical. So they don't have souls. So people hear, oh, they don't have souls, they must be demons. And no, they're just machines. They answer to, commands. They can perform simple functions, but you only give them as much brain power as they need, and that's why it takes 3 or 4 of them to accomplish the job. But in the Bible, when you hear Raphium, just think of the little gray ones. That's what those are.
I'm thinking of the artificial intelligence here in the States even, and they're almost completed. There is a IBM supercomputer that is calculated to run 300 quadrillion floating points per second. And the quantum computers, I don't have enough data to show exactly how fast they actually are. I do have the data on many of these silicone-based chips, and even the one in China right now that's running 93 quadrillion floating points per second. I mean, that is so incredible. So where am I going with this? The software that they have for predictive programming, combined with all the technology, all the research, all the data, essentially, that has been obtained from each human being, from their habits, the metadata, etc. I wonder if there's already like a ghost in the machine, and the archons or these entities possibly have a way to literally control, like you said, the politicians, the corporate gurus, those that have the money and the honey, essentially, to do their bidding. And it seems like they're turning this planet into a transhuman / all microchipped, all electronic, all artificial essence. I mean, now they're even running out 5G, not 4G anymore. Now it's 5G, where they want to have 5 billion hertz machines on every block, essentially, just blasting people with Wi-Fi constantly. I mean, the 4G isn't good enough. We got to have 5G, and then 6G, and then 7. I mean, just add a couple more zeros behind the hertz. It's getting ridiculous.
Well, Jason sent me some information dealing with AI, and they have found these signals coming from space. And they seem to have been sent from the past into the future. And these signals pretty much tell them how to build these machines. So guess what they're doing? Oh, let's build them. Let's see who can build them first. And that's not smart. These were AIs who lost the war long ago. So they sent this information to the future, hoping somebody would be dumb enough to build these things. And that's exactly what they're doing. Exactly what you described, this AI system. It's a very ancient war that took place. They never really lost, sort of just kind of to be continued. And that was the reason Tiamat was destroyed. Remember that black goo that ran all over the ley lines of that world? It was a massive artificial intelligence controlling that planet. And
is that what it is? So is black goo actually like artificial intelligence microorganisms that wherever they go, they connect to the group consciousness? So if it's a million miles away, it can send that information back and be controlled?
Right. And if any part of them gets destroyed in any kind of battle, or we find a way to destroy them, then that information is transmitted to the others, so they'll know what we're about to try and work against it. In other words, to fortify themselves against that type of attack. And the black goo is a sort of nanite. I understand the military immediately thought super soldier, right? Because these things can get inside of you and modify you at the molecular level. They're that small. And they did. They started modifying people. But what they started, these things weren't creating super soldiers. They were creating superhumans, but they were more benevolent. They were less aggressive, calmer. They just had this desire to either learn a lot of languages or learn a lot of sophisticated information. And it worked, just not what the government wanted because they couldn't control them. And so they released it into the sewer lines over in Europe. That particular group did. And so this stuff got into all the organisms in the sewers and then became airborne. And anyone who living next to these things all of a sudden started reading more and speaking different languages. And it's pretty fascinating when you hear these people talk about it. But they sort of tracked it down and found out what it was. It was the AIs that were released into the sewer systems. So this has already been released, but it is working more in a beneficial way. Now, the AIs, apparently the reptilians are allied with the AI, and their bodies are completely saturated by these tiny nanites. But the Greys used to be slaves to the reptilians, from what I understand. They broke away. The whole AI thing is interesting when you start looking at autism, because if you take a human child and make them catatonic through all these injections you give them, an AI system like this could easily infiltrate their body, connect where they need to, and run the body.